These are the insane origins of modern technology. Number 1. Messaging. Starting from the very beginning, around 70,000 years ago, someone scratched a rock on a cave and thought it looked like a stick. So then drawings were born, and people could message their relatives just like in the Croods where Grug tells his family stories about some dude dying. When societies grew bigger, they made drawings to represent currency, and then evolved into writing. Mail would eventually be created to message people, but the skill was reserved to small groups recording taxes, and historical events. Messaging from a distance was limited to smoke signals and were used for specific reasons like invasions. Egypt made the first mail system around 2400 BC, where messengers ran and delivered scrolls for the pharaoh, sort of like real-life DMs. This was pretty dope because it laid the foundation of the mailing service and hence messaging from afar. Later on, people noticed that a breed of pigeons would always return to where they were raised. In 1350 BC, they used pigeons to send messages across the Nile River. Horseback riding with mail was also a common practice for royal messaging like in ancient Iran. Essentially, most of the mail was reserved for the rich and powerful during this time period, or the equivalent of someone owning 30 bitcoins. Man, I should have invested in Dogecoin. Jumping 2,500 years later, now even a peasant could send mail in Britain. However, mail in these times were notoriously slow. Depending how far your mail buddy is, it could take a day or even months to reach them. So what if it was urgent news and you needed to notify them now? Well, back then, your news really would be late. You see, a man named Samuel Morse had gone away on a work trip. He was a successful painter that took on commissions from wealthy families and politicians. He got to work on creating a wonderful piece of art until a letter was sent to him. It was about his wife. She was sick, fatally sick. He dropped the commission and headed back to see her, but the moment he had returned, she had already been buried. This terribly broke his heart, and rightfully so. So he set his mind to make messaging faster than it ever was before. But how? He was on a boat returning from Europe and overheard a man speaking about this thing called electromagnetism. He engaged in a conversation with him and found that electricity could travel through wire almost instantly, and that wrapping metal with copper could make it temporarily magnetic. So he got a bright idea. What if he could send a message through wires of electricity? He made a button that completed a circuit when pressed, then the current would travel through a copper wire, which turned on a temporary magnet to create a dot or dash. Now, with a bit of help from a physician and a machinist, he was able to create the official telegraph. The first message was sent from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore in the U.S. in 1844. The message said, "What hath God wrought?" If you're confused as I was on what this actually meant, it's a verse from the Bible, and Morse sent this message to say he was gifted from God to make the invention. The receiving end of the telegraph would then have to decode the pulses into words, and so Morse code was born. Then a man in Italy named Guglielmo Marconi was fascinated with electricity and curious about the telegraph. He wondered, could it be possible to make a device to message without wires? You see, even though it was amazing at the time, placing wires was slow and expensive, especially over mountains and across the ocean. There was also a huge problem with messaging ships. You can't simply put cables on them. So he researched and found a certain phenomenon that would occur with a spark of electricity. Discovered by Heinrich Hertz, an electric spark created three-dimensional waves in the air, sort of like throwing a pebble in an invisible lake. This wave is otherwise known as a radio wave. Now, the reason why this wave was so important is that it could affect an electrical circuit. Using a glass tube of iron filings, it would nearly complete a circuit, but once a spark was made near it, the wave would travel and move the filings together and electricity would flow. He experimented a lot to make the range better by using antennas and higher voltage, which then led to 1901 where Marconi and his new team transmitted the first wireless message across the Atlantic Ocean, which was more than 2,000 miles away, proving to all the doubters at the time it was actually possible to message across the globe wirelessly. Jumping to 1984, two men named Friedhelm and Bernard developed the technology of SMS. During this time, people could only call with their telephones or cell phones, but not message. This then led to the first text message being sent on a cell phone in 1992 on December 3rd. A 22-year-old test engineer named Neil Papworth was making sure his software would work correctly for a company. He sent the first text message in history that said, "Merry Christmas" to a coworker at a holiday party. But it was only for the company to alert customers' information, so no texting back. Jumping a year later, Nokia released the first SMS-featured phone and allowed texting back. Unfortunately, people didn't have the digital keyboard we know and love today. The old phones had a number pad instead of a keyboard, so for me to try to spell out the word Riz, I would have to type 7 3 times, then 4 3 times, then 9 4 times, and then the same thing again. This inconvenience gave birth to the message slang such as BRB and LOL, and they still exist today. In 1992, the first phone with a QWERTY keyboard was introduced and lives were much happier. However, there was a big elephant in the room, and a really ugly one too. Let's say you're using phone company Verizon on your phone and your friend is using AT&T. You weren't able to message them. Why? Well, because companies were competitive and their phone lines were constructed completely different from others. So what changed them to become connected? Well, mostly because the government was like, hey, make these networks compatible. It's like super inconvenient to switch plans and cancel. So then phone lines were forced to, well, make them compatible. Then in 1999, everybody was able to talk with each other regardless of what service they were using. Remember SMS? Well, in 2002, people used that foundation to send more than just a text message. See, this is when cameras were on phones, but you couldn't send it to your friend. Then boom, multimedia messaging service was born and an image, audio, or video could be sent. Then in 2007, the first iPhone was released with a multi-touchscreen keyboard, making it easier than ever to message people with just using your fingers. In 2025, these are the foundations that make messaging instantaneous and are nearly accessible to the entire world. And I really feel honored to be in a time that such a normal part of my life is the work of several centuries of innovation, just so friends can send the most offensive Instagram